Hello friends, welcome back to Aunt Debbie's Boutique. It is now 2 days before Christmas and we got our little girl's Christmas dress done, but we need to make a matching shirt for Big Brother. So today I am using my favorite, all-time favorite shirt pattern. It's called the Thomas shirt by Felicity Patterns. And I've used a lot of shirt patterns, and this one is by far my favorite. Now, I hesitated in using this one only because it has a few more advanced techniques in it, but they're not difficult ones. So I think even a beginner, if they took it slow, could do all this. But one of the things I like about this pattern is this curved hemline. So many of the little boy shirt patterns are just chopped off straight across the bottom. And I don't know, I just don't like that as well. You may like it better, and that's fine. But I like this curved hem. And that's what drew me to this pattern to begin with. But the detailing on it is so nice. It has a double yoke on the back and on the inside. The collar lays real ticely on it. Now, it's only short sleeve, but that's fine with me. Out here in Texas, that's all I ever make. And when you get into long sleeves, you get into cuffs and a lot more complicated stuff. So I'm going to demonstrate this one today. Now, I cannot show you her pattern pieces or tell you measurements or anything like that. I'm not even going to tell you what size I'm making because if you are interested in making this, I hope you would go to her website and purchase the pattern. I haven't looked to see how much it is. I've had this for a long time and have made many shirts off of it, but I will link it below, and I hope you will check it out. I don't have a whole lot of her patterns, but the ones I have I really like, so be sure and check her out too. Okay, what we're going to need today is, of course, some buttons to go down the front. So we are going to have a few new techniques here. We're going to be making buttons and buttonholes, and I know that scares a lot of people, but we'll try to step through it. And we're going to be doing a collar and a double yoke on the back. So there's some new techniques in here. Maybe not new to you, but new to a lot of beginners, but I think they're all doable. So we will proceed on. Now I have my two front pieces here. I've got the back piece without the yoke. Then I've got the two yokes, one for the front and one for the inside. I've got the collar, two pieces for it, for the top and the bottom of the collar. I'm going to just put one pocket on. I just like one pocket. I don't like two. So we're going to do one pocket. And the collar needs interfacing, so that's for that. I've got two sleeves. And we've got, this is the facing and part of the collar for the front, and it also needs interfacing. So the first thing we're going to do is get some of the peripherals out of the way, get some of the things ready so when we start constructing, it goes real fast. Now I have gotten myself a new pressing mat, so you don't have to look at my old one, but because it was just getting stained. And that's just the nature of the beast, especially when you use a lot of steam like I do. Now, the jury's still out on whether I'm going to like it because it had me turn my settings down to medium heat, and I always keep it pretty high. And they said a dry iron was better because this retains moisture. Well, there's no way I'm going to not use my steam. I'm addicted to it. So we will see I'll try not to use as much steam, but we will see if I like it. If not, you may end up with my Oh Ugly one back again. Okay, this is Pelon SF 101. It's my favorite stabilizer. And I will try to remember to link it below. I don't think I did that in the little dress pattern. Okay, I'm going to have to turn this up because this isn't going to adhere if I don't. So I'm already breaking the rules. Lay those aside. Now I'm going to adhere this to one of the collar pieces. Oh, and also I went through and on any symmetrical piece like a sleeve, a collar, the back, I just did a little bitty tiny nip at the center point so that I could always find my center later if I need it. Sometimes you don't need it, but if you're trying to center things, it's really good to have that mark on there. And we only need to adhere this interfacing to the, I believe it's the underside of the collar. I believe that's right. I'll have to look to make sure I put the collar on right, but only on one side. Okay, that's not adhering real well because my iron wasn't as hot as it should be for that, but I'll touch it up in a little bit. Okay, the first thing I want to do is get the pocket put on the front. And here's our front pieces. And I love to match patterns. So I fussy cut this pocket so that it lays right where all the patterns meet. Now, you don't have to do that. That's just something I kind of like to do. So the first thing we want to do is turn under about 1/4 inch. And I better interject here that I loosely follow her directions, but I've been sewing, I don't know, 50 years, 60 years now. So, yeah, about 60 years. So I kind of have a mind of my own, and sometimes I don't even look at the directions very good, and I regret it. But, yeah, if I have to turn this iron down for this pressing mat, I'm going to go back to my ugly one. Okay, and then we're going to turn this under about 1 inch. Or 3/4 inch. I'm not sure what it says in there. It tells you, but it's about this much. Like having my steam back. Now I'm going to take this over to the machine and I'm just going to stitch this down before I do anything else. Okay. If If you notice me stumbling, pushing a lot of buttons with my machine over there, it's because I switched to a different machine again. I'm using my Viking Husqvarna. It has lots of nice stitches that I'm going to want to be using in the future. Now I'm going to turn under about 1/4 of an inch all the way around. Oh, and I did check in the seam allowance for this particular pattern is 3/8 of an inch unless it tells you differently. And the collar, we sew on it 1/4 inch. So you always want to check that. If I had done 1/2 inch like I did in the last pattern, it might be too small and my seams might not match up like they're supposed to. Okay, because I fussy cut this, I know exactly where it goes. So I'm going to pin it in place. Now I'm going to take it over to the machine and top stitch all the way around. But up here at the top, I'm going to stitch over a couple of stitches and then angle it back down to our hemline of our pocket on both ends. Actually, wherever I start, I'll go up and then over and then around. That provides extra protection there. If you have a child that puts a lot of stuff in their pocket, if you don't reinforce that, it'll start coming undone. So let's go do that. Now that we've got our pocket on, I'll iron it, and it just blends in because of the way it was fussy cut. Now, it doesn't always look that good, but I'm glad when I'm filming it that it does. Now let's move on to the collar. On our collar, we're going to sew 3/8 of an inch around here, and around here. So I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and stitch that. We want to leave this bottom wide curve open so we can attach it to the neckline. Now that we've sewn that, I want to trim this side, either clip it because it's curved, or you can put your own little notches in it, but I like my pinking shears. And then we also want to clip our corners so we can turn them out nice and neat. Then we want to turn this right side out. And I want to make sure and pull out my corners really good. We want a nice, crisp, pointy corner on our collars. I'm going to start by setting the seam on the inside. And then pressing it on the outside. Now I think the next thing we want to do is start assembling. And I haven't marked it yet, but I know what the measurements on the pattern. It tells you, it has little marks. And so for my center, I want to measure over a certain amount, draw a line on each side of our center. And we're going to use that to make a pleat. And the way we're going to pleat it is we're going to take this outside line, you can just fold it like that. Then the inside, it's like an accordion, the inside line, we're going to fold the opposite direction. And this should come in and meet right where our center line was. Okay, our outside line, we're going to fold like this with right sides together. Then the inside line is the opposite direction, and it folds in to meet in the center. I want to make sure I keep everything smooth right up there at the top. You know, I'm going to, oh, I did. I put a little notch in the down here so I know where the center is. Probably wouldn't hurt to put the same measurements. Because we want to iron this in. Really good. Iron this in place. Okay, let's look at it on this side. Okay, there's our pleat done. It is centered right there where our little notch was. I'm just going to stitch this real close to the edge just to hold it in place real quick. Okay, now that we've got our pleat stitched in place, first of all, I want to decide which yoke I want on the outside. And that's too close to that. I think I prefer this one. Okay, I'm going to take my center notch here and line it up with the center of our pleat. And then I want to pin the ends. And I want to take this over to the sewing machine and sew a 3/8 inch seam across here. Okay, I have sewed this seam, and I want to press the seam allowance up because later our other yoke is going to come down on top of it on the back side. Next, I want to take our two front pieces and we want to line it up. Let me do it so you can see it better. Line it up on the shoulder seams. And we want the outsides to match. And if anything's sticking out, it's going to stick out towards the collar, because when we catch that seam, it's not going to be sticking out again. It shouldn't be. Okay, I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and stitch our 2 shoulder seams. Now that our side seams have been, our shoulder seams have been stitched, we want to also iron them towards the back yoke. What I want to do is take my collar and line my, let's see, we want the interfacing side up. And then on the pattern, there was a little notch that's kind of hard to see, and that is going to fit right on our shoulder seam. Just a tiny little slash. It's not showing through on this very good. Let me recut. There it is. There it is. Found it. So I'm going to put that on that shoulder seam. Now we want to pin it quite frequently so it goes around that curve nice and smoothly. And when we take it over to the sewing machine to sew, we're just going to sew a 1/4 inch. The further back you try to sew, the more it's going to want to pleat. And now we'll just bring this out to the edge, and you'll have about that much left over. And you should have the same amount left over on both sides. So got just a hair difference. I'm going to stretch this one just a hair. Probably not even noticeable in the end. So now we have our collar pinned on here. I'm going to take it to the machine, and I'm going to stitch from this side because this is the side that wants to pucker, and it'll be easier to hold it straight. And we're just going to put in a 1/4 inch seam. Now our collar is sewn on, no puckers. Our shoulder seams are both pointing towards the yoke, so we did it all correctly. Let's give it a steam. Okay, we want to take our yoke, the other yoke, the inside one, and we're going to, I'm going to have to iron that back on. It didn't stay very good because my iron wasn't hard enough. These are going to get attached right here so that the inside edges line up. And I'll trim off some of that excess interfacing off camera. Okay, so but to do that, we need to fold it back like this. I'm going to put a couple of pins in it. And the same over here. Now let's take it over to the sewing machine and stitch that in. Now we're going to press this towards the back yoke. Okay, and press that 3/8 seam all the way across. Okay, the next step we want to do is take the facings and do something with the edges so they don't ravel. And so the pattern suggests that we overlock it either with a serger or with an overlock stitch or with a zigzag stitch on your machine. And I would probably do that with my serger, but since I'm not teaching about a serger, I'm going to go ahead and use like a zigzag or an overlock stitch just on this curved side of the facings. I ended up just using a zigzag stitch. I thought it laid the smoothest, but that just keeps your edges, your raw edges, from raveling inside of your shirt. In the olden days, we would have turned under 1/4 of an inch and stitched it down. Okay, now we're ready to put this on, and then we'll have all the hard work done. We want to take the right side of our shirt, but we want to turn the collar back. And we want to match up our center here again. And we'll match up our seam from our where our yoke and our shoulder seam, where our back yoke and our front were put together. We'll match that up. And then we'll match up these corner points right here. And then we're going to force everything in between to fit, which if we cut it right and use the right seam allowance, it should. Put lots of pins because this is a curved seam. Okay, you will notice that I have a pin about every inch, and I'm going to go real slowly and stretch it as I go so everything lays smoothly. And once we've done the rounded neck, then we'll come back and we'll have a nice straight seam to sew down each side. So let's go ahead and pin that while we're here, and then we can do both while we're at the sewing machine. All right, I'm going to take it over to the machine and I'm going to sew this edge with 3/8 seam. Then I'm slowly going to sew this curved seam with a 3/8 seam, and then I'm going to go down this straight edge. Okay, let's check our collar and see if we could put any pleats in there accidentally. None on that side, I got lucky. And none on this side. Okay, that was probably the hardest seam of the whole project, but as you can tell, it wasn't that difficult. So now you are an accomplished seamstress. I'm going to clip my corners here on the ends. And let's give it a nice press. Poke those corners out. Okay, now we need to address our yoke here. And what I'm going to show you is what we call a burrito method. And but if this confuses you too much, you can just turn under 3/8 inch seam allowance and either hand stitch this down here or top stitch it on the machine. And that would work just as well. But if you're interested in the burrito method, what we're going to do is roll this all up like a burrito. I'm just going to wrap that in there. Until this comes around and lines up. We have the whole seam out there with the yoke seam on the back. And then I'm going to catch my, line up my notches. Line up my end points. Put pin in the middle of each. We call it the burrito method, obviously, because it's all rolled up like a burrito. And you want to do that by laying it face up and rolling it then towards you, with the bottom down there and the top up close to you. Now, here's the catch. We don't want to catch any of our sewing, any of our fabric while we're in there. So we're going to turn it over and we're going to stitch right on top of that line, or maybe even a little bit to this side, so we don't catch anything that we don't want to in there. And you want to try to keep it away from your seam. So let's go stitch that seam. Now this is what it looks like, and we're just going to pull this out and turn it back, right side out. And now this seam is, once I get it ironed real good, nice and neat. And this seam, you can these two little pieces of seams, you can either just top stitch them in place, or you can hand stitch them in place. I think I will top stitch mine, and I'm just going to make sure it's lined up nice and neatly with the seam beneath it. And pin it. So it doesn't move around, and put a nice neat little seam across there. And since I'm stitching with thread that is the right color for my fabric, it won't show anyway. So let me go do that. Okay, you cannot even see where I stitched that. I'm going to press my pleat there a little bit on these side seams. In the end, I'll put best press on it and iron it real good. Okay, at this point, I want to do some top stitching, and I'm not sure it says to do this in the pattern instructions, but I just like the looks of top stitching. Plus, it holds your fabric, it holds your creases in there really well. So I'm going to start at one end, and I'm going to go probably about 1/8 to 1/4 inch from the seam, go all the way up, make the turn at the top, make the turn at the collar, go all the way around here, make the turn, come down there, and down here. And that will hold it when it's washed. The buttons and buttonholes won't get all messed up, and it'll hold its shape much better for a lot. Now our top stitching, it looks so neat and holds it nice in place. We're getting close to the end. All we have to do is set in our sleeves, do our side seams, put our buttons and buttonholes in, and hem it, and we'll be done. So let's do our sleeves next. These sleeves are going to be put in just like we put in the little girl's dress yesterday. I've put a little notch at the top for the center, and we're going to take it over to the machine and put our machine on your largest length, stitch length, and which is probably about a 6. And we're not going to back stitch at the start or the end, and we're going to stitch about a little bit closer than 1/4 inch, and then we're going to come in. Well, actually, because of this small side seam, let's do this 1/8 inch and then 1/4 inch on both sleeves, so we can gather it up just a little. It doesn't take a whole lot of gathering, but it helps it set in a lot easier. we have gathered our sleeves, and we don't need much gathering in them at all. And I checked the pattern, and really we were only supposed to run the gathering thread up here at the crown of it, so I apologize for that. It won't hurt that we ran it the whole way, but that's, if you have any gathers, you want them at the top. Now I'm lining up my front side seam with my back side seam, and then I'm finding the center of these armholes. I'm going to put a teeny tiny little notch right there. I'll do the same thing on this side, because I want the halfway point on both. Now I'm going to take my sleeves and let's match the notch there. And then let's match it down here on the side seams, and we'll see how much we need to pull the gathering threads. You want to, when possible, if you know which is your bobbin, and you want to pull the bobbin thread, it's easier to pull. And since I stitch face up, my bobbin thread is on the bottom. But this doesn't need much gathering at all. That gathering stitch is just kind of to help ease it. So see, I didn't even have to pull my bobbin thread. That is just to help us sew it. It ever so slightly is gathered. So I'll pin the other sleeve, and we'll go to the sewing machine and stitch our 3/8 inch seam all the way around our armhole. Okay, our seams are stitched in, and I zigzagged the edges so they wouldn't fray. You can overlock them or you can do nothing. And you see there's no pleats or even any gathers in here. That gathering thread just helps, since we're going around a curve, to get it to lay nice and smooth. So if you're trying to sew a curve and you're having trouble, just run a gathering stitch in there. You don't have to pull it and draw it up. Just, it helps it lay smoother. Now we're going to sew up our side seams, and I started pinning this one. And on your sleeve, there is a little, it slants this way and then back this way. We want to follow that when we sew our seam. That's so when we hem it, that it fits, this slant fits this slant. So you want to leave that in there. You don't want to straighten it at all. So let's pin both seams, and I will see you at the sewing machine. Okay, I went ahead and ironed it after I sewed up my side seams, just in the interest of time. I also zigzagged the edges of the seams so they won't ravel. And now we want to put on our buttons and buttonholes. And men's shirts overlap opposite of women's shirts. Don't you wish you were the person who thought that up? I had to Google it to find out which way for sure. So the pattern gives us the placement of the first button, and basically it's parallel just right across from the pocket. And that's how I decided where the pocket went. Now I have this nifty little tool that I just love that's for putting buttons on marking buttonhole openings. And I'm just now thinking, let's see, the men's shirt, the buttons go on the right, so the buttons would go on this side and the shirt would overlap this way. So confusing. Okay, this says use 5 to 6 buttons, probably depending on your size. And so I want to start the first button right here, and I want to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6. I don't think I want to do that 6th one. I think that's low enough. Now, the pattern also said there's a 1.5 inch overlap. So we want to put our button in the center of that 1.5 inch overlap. And the buttons I have are 5/8 inch. And I'm not real sure what all these markings mean on this thing. I hadn't looked at it that close, but I use this all the time. I am going to just put a mark here. I've got the bottom of this lined up with my top stitching all the way down, and I'm going to put a mark where I'm going to make every buttonhole. And I like to do my buttonholes first because you can't move a buttonhole, but you can move the button. Okay. Oh, I wasn't going to use that last one. Now, for a 5/8 inch button, I'm going to need a slightly bigger buttonhole. Use not quite 3/4, but more than 5/8. I'm going to lay this at the beginning of my buttonhole and put a little mark going this direction, so I know that's where I'm going to stop. Or that's where I'm going to reverse it. Now every machine, the buttonholes are different on, so I'm not going to be a whole lot of help on your machine unless it's exactly like mine. Mine has a computerized. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. We want one more. But basically, I'm going to start here at the top stitching, stitch back to where I get to this mark, and then I hit the turn button and it comes back. So I'm going to take this over to the machine and stitch my buttonholes, and you can watch me stitch them. But if your machine is different than mine, please refer to your manual and do your buttonholes like it says. All right, my buttonholes are stitched in there, and now I need to open them. I like to open mine with a seam ripper, but more than once I've gone to open it and I've pushed too hard and it's cut through the edge. So I learned a little trick online, and that is I am putting a pin right here at the end of my buttonhole. This is having to cut through a lot of different thicknesses. And then I'm going to cut, and that pin will stop me from going too far. Okay, now that we have that done, I am going to line the shirt up here at the top, because if it's off at the bottom, we can trim it and adjust it. And I'm going to overlap it the 1.5 inches, pin it in place, overlap it here, and I'm just eyeballing 1.5 inches. Now, these are erasable pins, by the way. I'm going to mark where my buttons are going to go. I'm just marking the center of the buttonhole. Then I can take this out, and then I want to measure over about 3/4 inch, give or take, and mark it this way. Such a dark print that I'm having trouble seeing some of these lines. Now that shows me where my button goes. Now I don't know what kind of machine that you have, but my machine will actually sew on buttons. So I'm going to sew these on by machine. And if yours has a button setting where it just goes back and forth, it's a tack, maybe called a tack setting, then you can lay your button down, and this one has 4 holes, so I'll have to do it twice, and tack it on this side and then on this side, and I'm going to sew them on all the way down on the machine. Okay, our buttons and buttonholes are all in, and wasn't that simple doing that on the machine? It sure goes fast, but you can do them by hand too. Now all we have left is to hem it. So to hem, I'm going to turn under 1/4 inch here, and then turn it over to where that V was, which is about 3/4 inch. And I'll stitch it by machine all the way around because my thread matches and it will be inconspicuous. So I'll do that to both both sleeves. And then on the bottom, I'm going to turn it 1/4 inch and then 1/4 to 1/2 inch again and stitch all the way around. So let me go do that and I'll get back with you when it's done. Well, here's our final shirt. Doesn't it look professional? We have the nice collar that lays so nicely, the lapel, our buttons and buttonholes look really nice. Got our nice curved hem. Turn it over on the back. We've got our little pleat, just like a man's shirt. I think this pattern comes together so nicely and so professional. I apologize that the last couple of videos have been extra long, but we've tackled some pretty big projects in those, and I just want to encourage beginners to stretch a little bit and attempt some of these patterns. If I didn't think you could do it, I wouldn't be demonstrating it. So thank you for joining me and for hanging in for the whole video. And I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, and I'll see you sometime after Christmas or the New Year. I have lots of neat things planned, and I'm going to spend the next week getting some recording done. So I may not post a video next week. It may be after that, but who knows? It depends on how much I get done. Okay, remember, whatever you do, do it to the glory of the Lord. Thank you.